Hey, this is my tutorial on, well, it's just a quick little guide on how I made the resin for this guy. You can see I'm in the process of polishing it up, but hard, sort of thick, clear, dark green, how I got the colour for it as well. So first thing is make sure you've got a base. I'm not going to use any actual base for this tutorial, but when you do, you want to make sure it's painted. All the stuff you've got in there is all painted, so when you pour the resin you don't have to, come back and fix things. So for example, I'll be painting on this base. I'll be using resin on this base just here, and I've painted it all up already, and then I'll just do the resin pour like I'm going to show you in a second. So you've got your base, and you want to make sure that it's taped off. So I'll show you how to do that. I've taped up the sides of the base. I've just used normal clear tape and then just cut around here to be neat. Now you can see why I've put it on cork here, because this needs to come below just to make it simple. And another thing is I don't really like doing resin bases on these style, because they come in here like a cone, which means the tape doesn't perfectly wrap around, which means you've kind of got to overlap, and these marks can show on the finished piece, which is when then you need to sand and polish it down, which is just a huge hassle because it's resin, and resin's really annoying to work on, to polish and whatnot. But yeah, so I've done this. Gotta make sure whatever's in here is painted, and now time to mix the resin. For the resin mixing, I'll be using Gadeo crystal resin. Now this comes in two parts. It's a two-part epoxy resin. Really good stuff, really easy to work with. And so to do a mix, you need 2 parts of A to 1 part of B. No matter how much you make, it's always 2 to A, 1 to B. So because this is quite a small base I'm going to be filling, I'm going to do just a small measurement. So probably 10 mil of B and 20 mil of A. I'm going to use separate cups for each, just because, so they don't mix and then turn to resin later on. And another important thing is plastic cups. Always make sure you use just random, well, not random, but plastic cups. I've got plenty just lying around for this. So you've got one to mix it in, and then one to pour it out and then do the colour in. You can just use one just to make things simpler, but I like using 2 just so things aren't left over. There's not random clear bits that are gonna pour in and look weird later. So first step is pour the ingredients. As I said before, it's 2 parts A to 1 part B. So I'm going to be using 20 milliliters of A. Perfect. Pour that into the cup. I usually like mixing this with the end of a paintbrush, just because the end of a paintbrush is easy to clean. Right, that's that. So I'm going to put this cup elsewhere, so for when I wash it I can make sure it's not being touched by the other part. So as I said before, 2 parts to A, we've done that, and then 1 part of B. So just the 10 milliliters because we used 20 before. This one's a lot easier to pour in. To one side. Bring back our brush. And then just mix this for a good 5 minutes. It'll start going cloudy. And then the more you mix it, it'll go clear and clear and clear. Once you've given it just a really, really good mix, you need to let it stand for the bubbles to come up a little bit. And then we can start adding color. Once you've mixed the resin, it's time to add color to it. Now, the color I used for the green is these 2 shades mixed, so Bale Tan Green and Nuln Oil. I'm going to start off, because it's quite a small dose, by using, I think we'll go for 5 drops of each, see how that goes. As the first time I used this, it was in a larger quantity, so we'll need less this time. So 5 drops of each. Make sure you shake it up first. Once you have added the first few drops, as before, just give it a good old mix. It's looking a little bit clear, so 5 more of each. There you go, that's looking perfect. So that's the color mixed. Make sure you give that a really, really good stir. Get everything from the edges. And, this is usually where I like to transfer it into a second cup, just so I'm absolutely certain the only stuff that is in the cup is fully mixed. There we go. Now we're going to leave that to stand for 5 minutes and we will pour afterwards. I've left it standing for a few minutes now and it should be good to pour. Now you want to make sure, before you pour, this is on a flat surface, you want to make sure the edge you have is completely sealed up. Like I said before, it's a bit of a ball ache on one of these bases that goes in. Usually, ideally, I'd be doing it on a flat-sided base. As you can see here, comes out really nice then, but we should be ready for pour now. Because there's nothing in this, it's going to be quite easy to pour. Usually you'd have to be selective, wait for it to level out, and then add a little bit more, and then add a little bit more, just to make sure it's covering everything perfectly and it's nice and level. And I'm going to reiterate again, make sure whatever you're pouring into is already painted, because this should be the very, very last step. Right. Now, if you've done it right, you shouldn't see any leakages at the start. Obviously, you've got to leave this a while to dry, and you may notice some things, so make sure you place whatever you're pouring into somewhere where you don't mind getting a little bit messy, just in case if it does leak. But from this stage onwards, you've just got to leave it for 24 plus hours. If it's quite a thick one, you may want to leave it 48 hours. I've had that in some cases, and honestly, it's just best to give it as much time as it needs, more than that even, because you want to be safe with this. You want to make sure everything's all right. Now, another thing I like to do is cover it up. So usually I place something like this, but of course no air will get in. So the reason I do this is because if you've got like a hobby room or something, dust gets everywhere, and the last thing you want is dust getting in your nice fancy resin pour. So what I'm doing is just making a little air vent in this cup. And there you go. That'll allow air to come in, but it won't allow anything to fall on top. If you've got a bigger base than this, there's other things that I've used. I've used lunch boxes, cake tins that I've sort of stood up a little bit off the ground with blocks of wood so air can get in, but dust can't fall on top of it. But all in all, that's pretty much everything. Simple as that. So yeah, make sure whatever you're pouring is being painted first, and sealed if you need to, and make sure that you give the resin more than enough time to dry. That is one of the most important things. There's nothing worse than peeling off tape on slightly dry resin. It can bend and warp and just turn out horrible, so you want to make sure it is completely 100% dry.